And now is the time for all ages. Hello, my name is Madeleine McDonell, and I identify myself as a pagan. Reverend Brian has graciously allowed to me to prattle on about a recently passed Sabbat, or holiday, Imbolc. What is Imbolc? Imbolc is our festival of lights at the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Winter solstice is the time where pagans celebrate the birth of the god, not unlike how Christmas celebrates Jesus' birthday. At Imbolc, the god is still young, and as a child, he's not entirely happy to be in lessons about his duties and would rather run around in nature and play with the animals. I'm sure there's someone around here who can relate to that. To celebrate this holiday, we light candles to call the god back and remind him that we need his light, because though young, he still understands how important his duties are and doesn't want us to suffer in winter. But it's not always like that. Imbolc is more than just calling the god back, as two children had learned. These children were a brother and sister named Alex and Bridget. They loved winter. They loved bundling in their winter clothes and going out to play in the snow. They would build snow forts to have snowball fights, build snowmen, snow angels, and when they were tired, they would go home to hot chocolate they would drink in front of the hearth. But there was one year when winter was especially harsh, and even though they lit the candles, spring wasn't coming. They went to their mother and asked, "When will spring come?" "Only the goddess knows," their mother answered. Bridget asked, "How can we ask her?" "Light a candle at sunset, look into the flame with an open heart, and wait." Alex and Bridget did just that. They waited and waited until the flame seemed to grow and its light filled the room. And from that light stood a beautiful woman. "I am the goddess," she told them. "Why have you called me, my children?" "We called to ask you a question," said Bridget. "When will spring come?" Alex asked. "Spring will come when clear water rises from the sacred well and a bright flame burns on every hearth." The goddess disappeared, leaving Alex and Bridget confused. When they asked their father what the goddess meant, he simply winked. That's the trouble with the goddess. It's hard to get a straight answer from her. The next day, Alex and Bridget bundled themselves up in their winter clothes and they went to every home in their village. They checked every hearth in every house and saw that they all had warm, strong fires. But when they asked, nobody knew about any sacred well. The only house left was Old Man Maddox at the edge of the forest. He was a crusty, cranky old man who yelled at children who came close to his house. The parents warned their children not to get close to him because he was a foreigner, lazy, and probably dangerous. But it was the only house that didn't have any smoke from the chimney. Alex and Bridget pushed down their fear and came to the house. When they looked through the window, they saw there wasn't a fire in the hearth, and Old Man Maddox was shivering in his bed. "Maybe he's sick," Bridget suggested. They opened the door to see the house was a mess, no cooked food, and Old Man Maddox laid up with a fever. Alex immediately brought out another blanket for him while Bridget carried in firewood. They cleaned the house and made a soup of the vegetables they found in the storage, warming the place up very nicely. Old Man Maddox, now warm, sat up to eat his soup. "Pesky children," he said in a gruff voice. "Never did like children, but I suppose I ought to thank you." "What we'd like to know is if you know of any sacred well," Alex told him. "Sacred well, Jingle Bell. I don't know any of your customs. The only well I know is the fallen-in well in the forest, but that's dirty and full of garbage." Alex and Bridget looked at each other. Surely that can't be the sacred well, could it? "I guess we should check it out," Alex told his sister. "We'll bring in more firewood and our parents will come back later." "Don't do me any favors." But they saw the smile Old Man Maddox had. They went to the forest, through the thick trees until they came to a clearing. It had a ring of stones scattered on the ground, and when they looked inside, they saw frozen mud, old leaves, and garbage choking it. "Could this be the sacred well?" Bridget asked. "It doesn't look like it, but if we clean it up, maybe we'll see some water." They do, scooping out the mud and garbage and the leaves with sticks in their hands until they finally see some clean water coming up. We can't do much more, Alex said. The sun is going down. We'll have to come back tomorrow with a shovel. But at least we've begun. You've done well. Alex and Bridget looked behind them to see the goddess standing in the clearing. You've begun the work, and that is all anyone can do. Excuse me. Is this your sacred well? Yes. A long time ago, the people of the village tended my well, keeping it clean and dressing it with spring flowers. But now they have forgotten the way here, just as they've forgotten the law of kindness to all. Without the warmth of kindness, how can the days grow warm again? And when my clear springs are choked with dirt, how can rains of spring fall? We'll remind them, Bridget promised. We'll bring everyone out here to finish cleaning the well. And we'll make sure to keep a fire in old Maddox's hearth, added Alex, even if he isn't very nice. The goddess smiled. You have lit my fire and cleaned my well, and now I will tell you a secret. Inside the heart of everyone is a secret well, full of the waters of love and joy and new ideas. This is the well you must keep clean, because it can be easily dirtied by hatred and selfishness. And inside of you is a fire that you must tend to keep burning so that you can grow strong, wise, and brave. Will you do that? We'll do our best, Alex and Bridget vowed. Bridget asked, will spring come now? Spring will come. The goddess winked as she started to fade. Spring will come as soon as winter ends. And as the goddess said, spring came. This is why we celebrate Imbolc. Not only to remind the god of his duties, but to remind ourselves of these lessons and to hold them close as we continue through the wheel of the year. We burn the negatives from the past year. We fill our hearts with joy and light. As soon as this is lit. We remind ourselves to care for those in need. As we keep pure the magical well within us. We remember the lessons of the past we've learned. As we tread toward our future. We will stay strong until the goddess and the god return at spring.
So, I loved Madeleine's story. And I especially loved how it is part of our theme on justice. Because what the goddess calls justice was caring for people, was doing good for everyone in the town, even for a foreigner who didn't believe in her. This is an archetype of justice, of caring for the poor and the sick. And when we in our society think of justice, we more often think of a judge at a podium with a gavel who's an authority figure dealing out punishment or maybe dividing up property, allocating money. It's a very different archetype of justice. And even if the judge is a woman or marginalized, it's still the same archetype of hierarchy and bowing to authority. This makes me think a lot of a ceremony I went to recently for my father's 90th birthday. It's called a kosun. Gusun. Oh, Korean pronunciation is terrible. So for the 90th birthday, actually for all of the 60th, 70th, 80th, and 90th birthdays are very special in Korean tradition. And we didn't do this for all of them, but for most of them, there is a a podium up front piled high with rice cakes, and the descendants come forwards and they bow to the person, the elder who's being recognized as a show. And the piles of rice cakes represent prosperity, and we bow down to represent this recognition of longevity and prosperity for this. As it turns out, so it was my father's 90th. It was also my Aunt Inja's 70th. My mother turned 87 at that time, and my father Haeyong turned 77, all within a week and a half of each other. So it was a big celebration. We had that, but it's still it sits awkwardly with me to sit and bow, and it does make me think of that authority and justice. And it does not necessarily bring to mind the love or justice. I do love my family, but this is a ceremony of honor and respect, propriety. It's one of the four Confucian virtues of propriety and observance of rights. But there is a place for honor and respect. I think it is good to also have justice, which is not dealt out by authority, but justice which comes from a place of love. I think I would like to have that. I mean, we have that in my family, but I'd like to see more of that. So there's a place for the goddess's justice and the goddess's love, which I would love to bring to my family.
Well, today's theme is justice is love in action. And the inspiration for that came from a quote from the Dr. Cornel West, a leading black theologian and academic, and he says that justice is what love looks like in public. Justice is what love looks like in public. There's a second part to that doesn't always get mentioned, is that justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. I think it's quite beautiful, and this service is really a continuation of one that I did at the beginning of January when I started exploring the new values that we're looking to replace our 7 principles, what was called Article 2 of our bylaws. Sexy name, huh? And two of the values, then we said love is the overarching value that incorporates everything else, but 2 of the other values are justice and equity. And I want to read what the proposed changes is that justice, we work to build diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where we all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of the inclusive democratic processes to make decisions. And then equity, which has got a huge justice component to it as well, says we declare that every person has a right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. And I think when you read those, you see like justice is love in action. And I invite each of you to think, where's your first story of where you became aware of the idea of justice? And perhaps more importantly, where you became aware of your influence on justice. And I'm sure I've got some earlier stories, but the first one that comes to mind, and it's not a story that I'm particularly proud of, because it's where I didn't do something, because often justice is about choices we make, given some situation. And I think I was about 15, I think it was back in 14, I think it was 1978. And of course I grew up in the west of Scotland, and there was a lot of turmoil in 1978. It was called the Winter of Discontent, is how it's referred to as a historical period. There was power cuts, there was a lot of strikes, both private and public, and the coal mine in the town I'd closed in, I lived in, had closed, so there was like 25% unemployment there. So I saw a lot of hardship where I grew up. But there was also one of my best friends, Paul. His father worked at the steelwork, which was 2 miles across the river at another town. I grew up in Hamilton, this was Motherwell. And he was a shop steward, which was a union leader. He was selected by his workmates to be the union representative. And Paul I loved, and Paul's mum I loved, and Paul's sister was a really good friend. His dad scared me. He was not known for his embroidery, let's say. He was quite a tough guy. And I say this as someone, I grew up as an adult, I loved him, and I saw him, and it was really sad. He just died a year ago, actually. But I saw Paul last summer when I was back. We would keep in touch. I've known Paul since we were 5 years old. And Paul's dad he was always a man he had a lot of strength and a lot of character, but he was tough, no nonsense guy. Well, we were in high school together, Paul and I heard in the news that Paul's father, he had a picket line, he was asking trucks not to cross the picket line. And he was arrested by the police. And I was a little bit surprised by that, but I met Paul every morning at the corner of the street. He lived just round the corner. And we walked into school, and I said, "What happened? I heard your dad got arrested." He said, "Oh, a white van pulled up that was unmarked, and he stopped it like he was legally allowed to do. The police 6 policemen jumped up, beat him up, and threw him into the back of the van and took him away." I said, "Oh, that's terrible, Paul." So we walked, and there was another friend of ours. We walked to school that day, and then, of course, that word had got around. It was a small town. So the other folk, rather than sympathizing, started making fun of Paul. "Oh, your dad got arrested," and all of this. "I hear he lost the fight," and all of this. And I could see the pain in Paul. And to me, to this day, I am so ashamed of myself that I did not stand up for Paul in that time. I could see the sadness. I could see the humiliation he was experiencing. Though some of that might be my own humiliation projected onto him because I was not standing up for him. So we went to our classes. Then I decided to find Paul after school that day and say, "Look, we'll walk home." And I said to him, "Paul, I'm sorry. I did not stand up for you. That was wrong." And we talked about that. And he accepted the apology. And we walked home. And then I recognized that one thing I said something to Paul. I said, "If I can't stand up for someone like you, who I care, who I love, who's a close friend, how can I stand up for anyone else?" And so I took that to heart. So that night at my own home, I talked to my dad. My dad was always a big supporter of the police. And I'd already had some not great experiences with the police as a teenager. And I told my dad what happened, and I was expecting to get into an argument with him. I was ready this time. I was going to stand up and get into an argument with my dad. And my dad said, "Really? That happened to Mr. Reddix, Paul's dad?" "I know Mr. Reddix. If that happened, that's atrocious. I'm really disappointed in the police." And I was like, "Oh, Dad, I want to fight. Come on." And so sometimes when we do take a stand, we don't quite know what's going to happen. And I think that's one of my first things. I learned from that what I didn't do when I had the choice to do something. And I think that's what we're all faced with. There's so many justice issues out there, and I know many of us are involved in justice, but there's so many things. But the great Jewish rabbi Tarpon says, "You are not required to complete the work, but neither are you free to avoid it." You're not required to complete the work, but neither are you free to avoid it. And I link that to Madeleine's story about the fact that the children started something. They didn't have to complete it. And I think that's a really important element that, justice, it can seem hopeless, but we are all called to be engaged in that. And our offering today is for faith in action. So the title of today's worship service, Justice is Love in Action. It's not coincidental. Faith in Action is an organization I've been involved with since I came here, and 2.5 years ago. And they do terrific work. And what they do is they connect to people most abused, oppressed by the system, and develop leaders. And so, this is an opportunity for each of us to get closest to the pain. I was close to Paul when I saw what the destruction that happened to him, that happened to his family and his dad. But what Faith in Action helps us do is get closer to the pain and really take leadership from those who are experiencing the problem, and they do wonderful work there. And I love Faith in Action, not just because of the great work they do. I mean, we've done work in affordable housing here. We've done work with extending the eviction moratorium. But last Sunday, I was at a meeting during the second half of the Super Bowl. I was at a meeting for Faith in Action in Belmont, because they're working to try and organize a tenants union for people at the Belmont Trailer Park who were flooded out. And they were developing leaders, and it was wonderful to watch their leaders at work, because they asked, what are the problems that you're all facing? What are the problems you're all facing? And then they hear the problems, and then someone in the meeting, one of the tenants said, so what are you going to do to help us? And Nanny, who's spoken here, actually said, we're not here to fix it. We are here to help you fix your problems. You are the leaders that need to fix these problems. And they develop leaders closest to the pain, and because they're closest to the pain, they're closest to the solution. I'm going to show you mercy and not go into my full reflection here. But don't worry, you can come back next week. But really the first part of the service was discussing how justice is action. And I will talk a little bit more about how justice is love next week, which I was planning to talk about. But one thing I do want to highlight, and I know Martha and Joanne would support me in this, is that it's so important for our presence to be with folks there. Especially, there's been many times where Latinas have come up to me, and specifically Latinas, when they've been speaking at a march or speaking to city council or speaking to the press and saying, thank you for being there with us. It means a lot. And I know Martha and Joanne have seen me many times. They always ask me if I'm there to do a prayer at the beginning, and I always say, would it not be better for someone to do it in Spanish? They say, no, they want you, the minister, to do it. And of course, I do the prayer and they translate it. But our presence there means a lot. So when you think, well, I don't know how to get involved in justice, bringing our identity, bringing our presence with them, bringing our presence in numbers, bringing our presence through our identity, bringing our presence as neighbors who love our other neighbors is such an important part of justice. So there's something we can all do through our presence as well. So when you see an email coming out about an action at City Hall, and I know we get so many things, and I can't attend everything I want, showing up is the first step in justice. So I invite you, if you can, to join us in doing that.